Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and I'm beginning a new series on YouTube with a new playlist called Moving Through the Maelstrom. For the past few years, my major playlist has been Dollars and Cents, which was shot at Tucson Access, a public access TV show here in Tucson. The concept of public TV is fading fast. I think Tucson was one of the last two cities or three cities that actually had it in the United States, and they had to close their doors last month. But we're shooting this, and I think I pretty much exhausted at least what I have to say on the question of money, where it came from, where we're going, and what's going to happen to us. And it was really sort of timely that a couple of months ago I got an email from a Mr. Steve Erickson. And he asked me a few questions, and I asked his permission if I could use his name and his email on this program to introduce my new topic. The topic of this playlist, the last one was Dollars and Cents. The topic of this playlist is going to be Moving Through the Maelstrom. Now, for those of you who read my daily news blog at www.drschoon.com, the title of that is Moving Through the Maelstrom, which means accompany me, or we're going through this crisis together. Because the crisis that I predicted in 2007 happened in 2008, and it isn't over. In fact, it's going to get even more intense. We're heading into what I call the end game. But I would like to remind you at the beginning that what I call the end game is really the beginning of another phase. One era is ending, another era is beginning. It is what we often call a paradigm shift. And a paradigm shift talks about fundamental changes. And the more fundamental the paradigm, the more fundamental and the more radical the shift is going to be. We are in my opinion, the mother of all paradigm shifts. Steve Erickson, he wrote me that I got this email from Mr. Erickson. There's two of them specifically. And I think the first one came a couple months ago. And it was quite kind. Dear Mr. Schoon, thank you for sharing all your insights with us. Your writings, your videos are among the most insightful in the world today. Thank you, Steve, for the kind words. In Sweden, we have such a crazy debt. We are in a lot of danger, and people just keep lending and buying apartments. It's crazy. And the central bank has negative interest rates, even though we are not in a recession here. We haven't actually noticed the crises from 2008 very much. But the rates keep dropping below zero. And that, to most people, is a great thing. It is truly a mad, mad world. I have two questions for you that would be interesting to hear your take on. Perhaps you have the time to write me, or when you do another video, you can briefly describe the question to the first. 1. What will happen, in your opinion, to those that are in debt when the end game really ends? And if there is a second revolution and unrest all over the world, what do you do to protect yourself besides protecting assets and buying gold and silver? Or how do you prepare? Again, thank you. Nobody has the insights you share. I hope you are wrong, in a way, that the world could move into a better place without a collapse, war, and violence. But I fear you are right, and I will be thankful for your answers. Well, I wrote Steve, and I said I intended to use the questions as the beginning point for another series of videos, but I wanted to know if I could use his name and read his email on the program, and he gave me his permission. And then he sent me this second message. Dear Mr. Schoon, thank you for writing. You are more than welcome to use my name and country in reference. It is a strange situation here in Scandinavia, and I presume especially in Sweden. Since most people don't understand or don't care what is happening all around us, people continue to buy even more expensive homes and apartments with money they don't have, created by banks, backed by nothing. And we have a central bank that for a very long time fought the system by not lowering interest rates. The private debt is too high, was the argument. But the last government did nothing. And this new government doesn't dare do anything either. I guess it would be political suicide to make people actually pay back their loans and stop giving them a kickback. Parentheses, the larger the debt, the larger amount of money you get in a tax reduction. But now, the central bank has basically given up and began pouring gasoline on the debt fire. They have now turned all the responsibility to the government, and the interest rates are, for the first time in history, negative. Most people don't even have to pay interest here in Stockholm. They just keep floating and arguing that, well, the house might go down in value for some time, but they don't intend to move. So the question then is, what will happen with those who owe the banks millions of Swedish kroner? That is really relevant. And since I believe your financial advice is the best, the preparation to get through the crises is of great importance. How do you prepare regarding everything that doesn't have to do with money, food, relocation, equipment? That would be very interesting to hear about. Again, thank you for sharing your insights. I wish more people read your books and listened to your important message. You are a lifesaver. Best wishes, Steve Erickson. Thank you, Steve, once again. A few years ago, I was giving a talk in Europe, I believe in Hungary, at Professor Antal Fekete's Gold Standard University. And he was giving a course on Austrian economics. And an American had come down from Switzerland because he heard I was going to talk there. And at the end of my talk, he raised his hand and he asked me a question. I don't remember the question, but I do remember my answer. I looked at him and I said, that is a metaphysical question. And his answer was, yes, I know it is. That's why I asked you. It reminds me of something that happened a couple years ago in the spring, I think 2013 in Las Vegas at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium. And I was among 20 speakers at that event, and they ran the gamut. And I had 20 minutes to talk, and I gave my talk. And then I was listening to the next speaker, and one of the people in the audience came up behind me. And he was whispering in my ear behind me. And this is what he was saying. You know things you're not telling us. I want to know why. I found out later this man owned a gold and silver mint. The fact that he owned such a gold and silver mint meant far less to me that he asked me that disturbing question. You know things that you're not telling us. I want to know why. Well, perhaps in this new series, Moving Through the Maelstrom, I'm going to focus on those things that I haven't really told other people because of the great difference between my points of view and the points of view of what I suspect my audience has, even though that's an assumption. Some of you do share my points of view, many of you don't. And before I begin to answer Steve's question, I would just like to say that I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying this is my point of view. And the point of view I have was not achieved lightly. When I got in 2007 and predicted the collapse that was coming, I had spent 10 years approximately focusing on the reasons and the cause of the Great Depression and looking at economics in a very, very different way than I ever had before. My major was not economics, it was in political science, and I was interested in questions of power inherently. But when I began to look at the question of money, the question of power, at least to me, became apparent. And my questioning about economics, even though it began in the 1990s, what I began to find as we move closer into this crisis that we're all in today, here in 2015, that pieces began to fall into place to questions that I had been asking since the 50s and the 60s. I am 70 years old. And I have some thoughts about the shifts that we're going through. And I have some answers that I didn't have when I began asking those questions. And perhaps it is the venue of moving through the Maelstrom that I'm going to answer some of those questions that some of you have been asking with answers that I have not before given you. And I think part of the reason is we are deep into the end time, what I call the end game. This is 2015, halfway through. I gave my talk predicting the collapse in 2007. But as I have said on some of these programs before, it was in 1991, it was 1991 that I heard those words telling me about a coming crisis that it called the time of the vulture. And it was far before then that the context with which I am going to explain the economic collapse first came to my attention. I've been looking at these questions for 50 years, and I do have some answers. And what I'm telling you, these are not the answers perhaps that you may have, but that's why we are in this together. I'm not saying I'm right, but I do think I have achieved somewhere with all of this that you might find it interesting to see why I believe what is going to happen may in fact happen. For those of you who go to my website, drschoon.com, S-C-H-O-O-N, is basically my daily news update on what I call the bad news, all the bad news that you can bear without being on medication. And it's not that I want to bum people out. I see my putting up that news as a counterweight to the propaganda that the media puts out about our present economic situation. Our global economy is basically a Ponzi scheme of credit and debt. And unless the victims of the Ponzi scheme, you, the borrowers, feel good about the future, you are disinclined to even take on more debt than you already have. Steve Erickson pointed out in Sweden that there are those who are buying homes like crazy, figuring that, well, even if it goes down a little, what are they going to do? But their recent memory has been shown they've always been bailed out. This is at the end. The Ponzi scheme is ending. But the bankers know that if you, as consumers, taxpayers and individuals, become nervous, you're going to be far less inclined to buy that new house, that new car, that college loan, or to take on more debt than you even have today. And that's the purpose of their good news. The Ponzi scheme is a con game, a confidence game upon which your confidence is all important. The Chinese were late to this game, and they fostered a stock bubble that was massive, that has lost 30% in the last 1 month. And they moved in to try and tell their population that all is well. If it was all well, they wouldn't need to do what they've done, is to start buying stocks and force the market back up. It is not well. It has been going wrong for decades. And we are now at the end of that process. The Ponzi scheme of credit and debt, the bankers set in motion in 1694 with the Bank of England, spread to the United States in 1913 with the establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank, and within the next 100 years, central banking has taken over every country on earth, even the ones that said no. Communism. They said no to the bankers' Ponzi scheme. And even then, they had to collapse. Their systems collapsed against a system that was far more effective, far more leveraged, and far more effective for the time that it was in process. In 1991, communism collapsed. In 2015, capitalism is collapsing. And by that I mean not by free markets. When I say capitalism, I'm not saying free markets. Free markets existed long before capitalism. Capitalism is defined by myself, not as a free market, by the introduction of debt-based money into a previously free economy. And once you do that, considerations of credit and debt become paramount and become far more important than supply and demand. And I think if you are watching today's economies, you will know this to be true. Well, if you go to my website, you'll find not only the daily bad news, you will also find more and more articles on what I call the earth changes. I began introducing this idea into my daily news blog probably 3 or 4 years ago. And I would always say, record heat, record cold, record rains, fires, floods, drought, etc. The earth changes are here. And then I would give a little news blip from around the world. And in the beginning, it was not so easy to find those things. Today, probably those earth changes comprise at least half of what I post on my news site. I want to show you something, and that's this. This is a chart of natural disasters. This is the beginning of the 20th century. This is around 1945, and this is around 2000. This is the chart of natural disasters. Earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, drought, fires. We are in the end game. And that is a metaphysical point. Most people, to them, it's just background chatter. If I'm going to answer the questions that Steve Erickson posed to me, I'd like to answer it in a short way by what I have answered that I have ended each one of my papers with since I began writing them in 2007. For those of you who have followed my articles, I have ended each one of them with this tagline: buy gold, buy silver, have faith. In my book, Time of the Vulture, I wrote about faith. And I said you can buy gold and you can buy silver, but you can't buy faith. And in 2007 I wrote those words, but you better get some now while the getting's still easy. This is 2015. Faith cannot be bought. Faith is something that happens as a matter of a point of view of your journey through life. Life is a two-edged sword. On one edge, it's a sort of fear, and the other edge is a sort of faith. But it's the same sword. And we are moving into a crisis that is so intense that it is going to move through each one of our lives. The gentleman who wrote these questions to me is from Sweden. My articles have been translated into Chinese by a reader, Andy, who lives in Japan. What we're going through is going to be different for each and every one of us. But what I want to tell you in these coming programs is something that's true not just for me, but what I think is true for you. That is true not just for those in the United States, Sweden, China, Chad, Mauritania, anywhere. It's something that is happening to the planet. It is something that has never happened on this planet before. That is why my answer is, as I gave it to that gentleman in Europe, that American who had lived in Switzerland, he asked a metaphysical question. And so did Steve. What are my answers? How do we prepare for what is going to happen to us? As for myself, as for his location, Martha and I have been on that quest. We've been to New Zealand, we've been to Europe, we've been to Uruguay, we've thought about Ecuador, we've been to Australia. We've seen beautiful, extraordinary places. I have a map hanging on my wall, a map that shows different areas of this world, the ones that are going to be most affected by a collapse of the present monetary system, the ones that will be least affected by them. The map is there, and yet I am still here in Tucson, Arizona. I believe that where I am and where you are is destined. You are where you are for a reason, just like I am where I am for a reason. You are who you are for a reason, just like I am who I am for a reason. And the fact that we are both here at this incredibly important time of tumult and change is also for a very important reason. I believe I have insight into the crises that we're going through. And what I would wish to tell you who are going to go journey with me through this new playlist of Moving Through the Maelstrom, that it is going to be far more intense than anything we've ever done. And the rewards are going to be far greater than anything we have yet received. Just like money is not what it looks like, to me, money is not, it's no longer a storehouse of value. It was when it was backed by gold and silver. To me, money is a trading coupon, and each one is written an expiration date in invisible ink. But when that money system crashes, when all those people with all those debts are holding that money, are holding those debts, when the system crashes, it is going to be the beginning, the end of that system of debt, and the beginning of another system. I don't know what that new system will be, but I do know it will be far freer than the debt slavery imposed on us by the system that we are in. To those of you who are listening to this in Greece, you have my deepest sympathy. To those in the United States who will experience what those in Greece are now experiencing, you also have my deepest sympathy. But what we are going to go through this crisis is going to change us in a way that we need to be changed. It is going to send us through emotional shifts. It is going to force us to go to a level in ourselves that we have never gone before. I would like to end this with a story about Don Juan when he ran into that Yaqui shaman. Carlos Castaneda, when he ran into the Yaqui shaman Don Juan in Mexico. The shaman who looked at Don Juan, a graduate student at UCLA studying cultural anthropology, who had gone to Mexico to study indigenous cultures. And he met a shaman, a man of wisdom and of power, far more than he ever expected to meet. And at one point, Don Juan looked at him and he said, "Ah, Carlitos, you think I'm a dumb Indian, don't you?" Carlos Castaneda said, "Oh no, Don Juan, I don't think that at all." Don Juan said, "I know what you think. It's all right." And at one point, he told Carlos Castaneda's story. And he said this: the coming of the white man to Americas was destructive to our world. It reduced us to animals, to slaves, to people who have lost what they once thought true and believed. That's what the coming of the white man meant to us who lived in America. But for the very few of us, it forced us into a change that reintroduced a reality that we had long since forgotten. I am a man of power because of the crises, because of the coming of the white man to America. And what Carlos Castaneda learned from Don Juan was that crises are destructive as they can be to the previous paradigm, are an opening into a world far greater than the paradigm it's replacing. All of us here on this planet, whether in Sweden, South America, Asia, the United States, North America, South America, male, female, or anything, are here at what I believe are an extraordinary time. A time of extraordinary importance. A time at which we are going to discover not what money is necessarily, but who we are. Thank you for listening. We do this together.